back to Missouri. Welcome back to my channel. I'm so very happy that you're here. So I'm going to talk to you today just a little bit about my cottage garden before I put it in and show you some of my decision making and planning that I had to go into making this garden. So a little bit of back history on cottage gardens. Back in the Elizabethan days, people were stepping away from the very structured English gardens, which was like hedgerows and evergreens and more whimsical, more inviting curb appeal to other folks. They also had to be very practical, so they would include food for things like stews and soups, and they had to grow their own culinary herbs and their own medicinal herbs, their own wildflowers for making their own medicines, and their own flowers for special occasions like weddings, funerals, and what have you. And they did all this by just sort of mixing it together. It made it very beautiful to passersby, and it was also considered their sanctuary for when they came home. And they felt comfortable because they had everything they needed right there adjacent to their home. Now, can you have a cottage garden if you're in an apartment and all you have is a balcony? Absolutely you can. Just mix a few herbs in with a couple of your favorite flowers and you've got a lovely cottage garden. All of your determining factors mostly is your hours of sunlight and how much space you have. So my cottage garden is going to run along my fence line. I made a whimsical fence out of things I drew out of the woods. I put it along Penny Lane, which is outside of my home. We call it that because we do toss down our loose pennies and we make wishes. It's just what we do with some of our pennies. So 100 years from now, somebody's going to find all of those pennies and think they really found something. So there is, I don't know how many feet down, but it's just a stark fence and it's whimsical and it's beautiful, but there's nothing growing there. So I definitely wanted to put in a cottage garden. So I chose flowers that were more colorful and whimsical, things like rose sprays. I talked to you about the native prairie rose that I put over here, a native fern that I put in, and some flowers that I've chose. And I'd like to go over some of the plants that I chose with you, and then you can determine what will work for you in your own cottage garden. Let's get started. So now moving into the planning stages of this cottage garden, most of you are aware that cottage gardens need to be simple, full, and busy. Two aspects that I wanted to reflect in my garden is practicality and romance. Now normally those two things don't go together. I think of romance as impromptu and impractical, but we're going to try to make practical romance work in this case. So the colors that I chose to go with pink, white, purple, blue, and lavender, and I chose to avoid yellows and reds. Now in my country, I'm in the United States, yellow and red are both cautionary or stop colors, and I don't want you to feel that when you approach my garden. I want you to feel that warmth and invitation when you approach my garden, and that's why I went with the colors that I did. Also, I chose not to go with any posy type plants. Posies and nosegays are meant to be held up like this, and that feels like a barrier between you and me, where romantic plants can be held more in your open arms. So things like sprays and trailing plants and tall plants made sense there. Also, sunlight is a very big determining factor. In my 32-foot fence row, I get the morning sun and I get dappled afternoon sunlight, so I needed plants that would fit in both of those occasions. So for practical, I chose to go with peas. Peas can be eaten as soups and stews and salads, and they also have those little fanciful little tendrils that help them climb. So I thought peas would be a great addition, and I went with Little Marvel. And then also for practical for me is a lot of chamomile. I went with German chamomile. Chamomile is my go-to drink in the summertime. I drink it more than anything else, and it has such a sweet aroma and scent to it. So I chose to go with chamomile. Now I also have 4 containers. I have 2 pots and 2 containers. And in those containers, I already have trailing phlox and a small patch of bluebonnets. And so I thought sweet alyssum carpet of snow would be a great complement in one of those containers. And in the other container, I already have lemon thyme growing, and so I've decided to pair it with ageratum in blue because they only get 8 to 10 inches tall. So I'm hoping that that works out. Now I'll go through the seeds that I chose for the fence row. So the seeds that I chose, well, the seeds I chose are pretty obvious for a cottage garden, and see if you don't recognize some of these. So I went with larkspur and delphinium. They are both in the buttercup family. Larkspur is going to be considered an annual, where delphinium is going to be a perennial. It's going to come back for you every year, and your larkspur is going to get about 3 to 5 feet tall, where your delphiniums are going to get 2 to 4 feet tall. And the tallness of them is going to be braced up against the fence, so they're perfect for my fence line. And then I also chose lupines. Lupines are in the pea family, they're in the legume family, so they're going to pair up pretty nicely with the peas that I chose for the practicality. Now I'm going to take you over and I'm going to show you some of the plants that I chose also to go in this garden. You're going to hear my wind chimes over here. Hopefully it's not too disturbing. So I went to my favorite nursery up in Kansas City, and I was specifically looking for plants that would fill in the lower half of the garden, because the other plants are going to get so much taller that I wanted something to keep it full and busy down at the bottom. And so I went with toadflax. And I chose it specifically because of the foliage. I just think this foliage is going to give it so much fulfillness. It's going to fill it out, and it's just got so much interest. This is the kind of plant you just want to reach out and touch. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then in white, actually called Crystal Peak White, I went with false dragon head. I actually wish I would have gotten more of those, but hopefully it'll seed out for me. But look at these little teeth on the leaves, if you can see that. So I kind of like the leaves on this too. It's so starkly different from this one that's right next to it. And then also, who can resist meadow sage salvia? Look at that color purple up against the wood. Is that not gorgeous? Absolutely gorgeous. Okay, so all I'm going to do is dig a trench and put these plants in. Well, I dug out my trench all the way down the 32-foot fence row, and then I put in my 5 potted plants, have them spaced out the way I want them. My rose and my fern were already in place. My fern is struggling a little bit in this intense sun, but I think once these plants start to come up and shade it, and after that, many of the plants are perennial and they'll help protect it. So I hope I do okay with the fern, but I feel really confident about the rest of these plants. So now I'll just go down the trench row and put in those seeds. So here we go. Let's take a tour of the garden. So this was last year's project, refinishing an old grill. And so this is on the left side as you walk in. And now on this side with my whimsical fence. So you can see the flowers planted, and the rose is doing so well here. Now I didn't plant a lot of flowers right near the rose because she will spread out and drape over this fence, but I plan on keeping her somewhat in check. And so just kind of going down in between the plants, obviously, is where the seeds are. And yes, I do have fairies and gnomes that garden for me during the night. And it just goes the entire 32 feet. Hello, butterfly. Are you already visiting my cottage garden? Okay, and then on the inside of the fence is where I planted the chamomile in these 2 pots. And one of my plants, actually, a little branch broke off. And so this is inspirational from my friend Deb at Spring Hill Farm and Garden. So she would never let this go to waste. So I trimmed off all but the top leaves for photosynthesis, get it wet, dip it into the hormone, put it down in the center, and propagate that baby. Let's hope for the best. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video of cottage gardens, romance and practicality brought together. If you did like it, please give it a thumbs up. If you have not already subscribed to my channel, please do so. It really helps me bring you more videos inspired by nature. Much love and light. Blessed be.